This meeting of Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, is a body we congregate in these council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall. Here. Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mrs. Stickley. Mr. Blair.
Here.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Here.
Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Mr. Mumper.
Here.
We do have 6 members present. Ms. Stickley emailed us earlier that her husband was ill, so we hope he's feeling better. We have one request to amend the agenda, and that is to add a resolution objecting to the renewal of the liquor permit of Pal Cincy LLC, DBA Sherman Market, permit number 66200540001, requesting a hearing and declaring an emergency. Mr. Mumper.
I move we amend the agenda as you just stated.
Seconded by Mr. Bonsall. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next are the minutes of the April 11th, 2017 meeting, which were distributed by email. Mr. Clark?
Move to approve the minutes as of read.
Seconded by Mr. Bonsall. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have one request to address council on agenda items, and it's regarding the C9 Trust, and so I will ask that they speak on that prior to consideration of changing appropriations, if that's okay with you, since there is, it does address that C9 Trust, so we'll have them speak before that ordinance. We don't have any reports of standing committees. We don't have second and third reading of ordinances, and so next is introductory reading of ordinances, and that is an ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2017 and declaring an emergency. So, Mr. Gatto and Mr. Walters, would you like to come forward, please? If you'll give us your names and addresses, and if you, you'll have 5 minutes to address council. I know you said you wanted to speak together. We normally hold it to 5 minutes or thereabouts. If you need additional time, we can have council consider
Good
that.
evening, my name is Bob Gatto. I'm the spokesman for the Norwood Police Retirees. This is Dave Walter. He's the spokesman for the Norwood Firefighters Retirees. To get started with, Mr. Stiff, who's not here, called me Friday at my house and informed me that the Norwood City Council was going to appropriate money into the C9. And he gave me the figure, and I don't remember, 453,000 or something like that.
446.
Okay. And I said, well, that's great. And I said, our membership will be happy that they're going to start receiving a few checks. And I also told him, and I'm going to tell you, that we haven't received a check in 30 months. Since the end of 2014, none in 2015, none in 2016, and brings us up to April of this year that we have not received a check. And our membership has been, I would say, very, very understanding of this. And we get a lot of phone calls from our membership wanting to know when it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And, you know, you just, after a while, you run out of answers because I don't know when it's going to happen. Well, he called me. And then in the same breath, I'm going to throw this out there because it kind of got me upset, that Mr. Stiff said he would like to form a committee to negotiate to buy out our health. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, if we could sit down and negotiate and have a committee, we would like to negotiate a price that we would give you a check every year at the same time to buy out your health. And I said, well, I'm sorry, we could never recommend that to our membership because that's not right. And then I thought to myself, well, does he have the right to bring that up or not? And to bring a committee together to form to try to buy out our health? Well, I talked to Dave about it, and of course he said the same thing. We'd never recommend that to our membership because that would never fly. And then I got, just kind of hit me funny, and I thought to myself, you know, after all these months of trying to find out what's going on, has it come to the point where maybe I should just push a recorder when somebody calls me and record it? And that way, I would have it right here to play for you. But I thought I'd throw that out, and we're happy that we're going to receive some money, but the problem is, he said that catches us up on our all our C9. Well, that's not quite true. As you can see, 30 months, we haven't received a check, and the retirees get $2,250 per person every year. And roughly, we have 165 members, and if you do the addition, you're going to find out that $446,000 doesn't cover that. So it's I don't know if this is for 1 year, but he told me it catches us up all through all these years, and it just doesn't. And we've got figures, and also, does the council know that each member gets a $500 optical, dental, and a prescription optical, $500. Now you add that on top of $22.50 per person. Now you're coming up with $27.50 per year. And if you add all that up 12 months or 30 months, you're going to find out that
About 1.1 million
we're about $1.1 million
for 30 months.
and for 30 months, and $446,000
Yeah.
doesn't catch us up. So that's what we wanted to inform you, and and apparently the state knows this. So I don't know if you've heard from the state, but they know it, and their answer wasn't. They weren't real thrilled about it. Let's put it that way. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from them, and if anybody's got any questions, you can fire away for a while. Anybody got any questions
Mr.
on the
Walters,
figures?
did you want to say anything? No?
Anybody got any questions on the figures that we just threw out there? Are you aware that we haven't been paid for 30 months?
Mr. Mumper?
That 446,000 is just what's been requested by the members to be reimbursed for expenditures, correct?
Yeah, for the C9,
That's all that is.
right.
Okay.
It's for the, yeah, for C9.
We understand that,
Yeah, did you know we haven't been paid for 30 months?
yes.
Okay. And did you know that that would not catch us up?
I didn't say that.
No, I know you didn't. Mr. Stiff did.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Thank you. Actually, there have been many people who haven't been paid for 3 years. I know that. We've also been told that the Millennium is caught up. I know that all the bills have not been paid through Millennium. You can talk to anybody, many people have these bills, so I know that's not paid up. I did talk to the state about this on Friday after your call. And I talked to the mayor today, who said that the state will be meeting with him and AEBS about this.
Yes.
So hopefully, and I agree, I went through numbers last night. I worked for hours going through, the past 3 years. I can't imagine, to me, it looks like it would also be over $1 million that's owed. And that's all I'll say right now. I'll speak more about it under old business.
That's all we got.
Any other questions?
No?
Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll move on to consideration of the ordinance, and this is an ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2017 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I recommend we have all three readings.
Seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion? Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, we just discussed the first item, the other two items, the civil service is funding to have a test advertised and in place for police. And the third item is a contractual obligation with, I believe it's part of our Motorola account for dispatch for the radio system. And so those are brief explanations of those other two items.
Any other comments? Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So I was curious about the dispatch. I mean, I guess we can talk about it after the 3 readings, but I will just put that question out here while I'm here. So is it the radios or is it like actual dispatch equipment? I guess I'm just curious why it's under the dispatch key and not like under like a police or fire key, since it's, the police or fire are also using them.
There is,
Mr. Sanker?
there's also that service for radios and that there's police and fire also, but this has to do with some of the equipment that actually is used in dispatch as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I just received a certified letter that we are in arrears. Yes, Mr. Sanker?
And I think that under police and fire and their debt service, the radios were, that was listed under in the appropriations.
Okay,
Right.
great. Thank you.
The certified letter that I just opened this evening says that we are more than 90 days behind in the $70,403, which is the amount in here, and that was due November 30th, 2016, and then there's also a payment due on April 30th of $57,976. So that was sent to the mayor with a copy to Mr. Moore, Mr. Gears, and myself. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Hi, thank you, Madam President. I'd like to say I will be voting for the appropriations, with the understanding that I would like to see our membership get paid from the C9 Trust, but I want to know with the understanding that I don't believe that this is the full amount owed to the membership.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2017 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2017 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2017 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Clark,
Move to pass the ordinance.
seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is an ordinance adopting updated sign regulation code under Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances. Before we consider this, I'd like to let you know Greg Orris is here, who was instrumental in getting this done. If you would like for him to speak, Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I would recommend to give Greg some time to give a background on this ordinance before we consider.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Clark. The motion on the floor is to have Mr. Orris come up and give us some background information on this. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Greg, welcome, good to see you.
Good evening, and thanks for giving me the time to speak about this. So I can go into any amount of detail, or if I keep going on, you can
It's all yours.
cut me short as well. So a little background with this. The U.S. Supreme Court, it's in your original packet here, issued a decision with Reed and Town of Gilbert in 2015 concerning municipal sign codes, and it called into the question a variety of content-based laws. Content means the message that's inside a sign. This was a continuation of recent court cases that pretty much said no more content-based signs are allowed. And this is a First Amendment issue, that there's no power to restrict the expression because of message, its ideals, or subject matter, or in reference to that, its content. So the City of Norwood's existing sign code is kind of similar to our old sign code the old zoning code that we recently redid. It has many of these content-based provisions, and therefore, if it was ever questioned in court, its constitutionality of the code could be called in question, and we would have a hard time justifying that content. So that in itself calls for a change in the sign code. And while we're already redoing it, we might as well take some of the momentum that we have from when we originally, like we said, transitioned our sort of 1980s planning and zoning code to a form-based code. We used historic Norwood photos and mixed-use development projects as examples. And if you look at the packet that I just gave you, the color pictures, the first one on there is historic Norwood photos. And you can see that some of the pictures have signs that are currently prohibited. And that was obviously through abuse and things like happened during the 80s, I think, and the 70s, where those signs and that allowed signs and the size of those signs were abused by some of the commercial establishments. So what we have done is taken a look at historic photos, such as we see here, and tried to get the intent back that traditional Norwood values have in those photos. So what we're doing, in effect, while we're taking out the content-based, is we're allowing some signage varieties while not allowing other signs that have sort of gotten away from that. And so that way we can use design standards that reflect the image of the city. An important note is, obviously, the city is pro-business, and we're not trying to hinder economic development. We're actually trying to provide additional options and make a sign code that is easier to read and is functional and clean, and most importantly, content neutral. And then the summary here, I won't read it to you here, but it's important that codes, and especially sign codes, have an explanation, and that's what you'll see kind of on the first page of that. And it's longer than the original one, and that's an important distinction because there are some sign codes that have been invalidated by the courts simply because they didn't have that intent of the code. So you really need to make clear the intent of the code. So that's what we do by having a little bit more detailed description of that. So what I'll do now is kind of go over sort of the main portions very quickly, and then you can stop me sort of at any time, but it goes into the different sections, and I'll try to go through those relatively quickly. The definitions are pages 2 through 12, and most of the definitions that we're getting rid of have that reference to content. The other changes that you'll see of areas that we're adding are such things as the definition of the sign types that we're adding, like awning, bench signs was never included. Those are signs that we're going to prohibit. Blade, cabinet, electronic messaging, and things such as that. So the only one that I think would be worth debating and looking at that we looked at quite a bit was the vehicle sign. I know that was an issue a little while back, and that's on page 11, as long as we're looking at the same document there, which we should be. Page 11 has vehicle sign and new wording on that. So that may be something to investigate or look further at, if you have any questions on that. But we want to really reference the not an operating condition, not a currently registered or licensed vehicle, not actively used as a daily function to which the signs relate. So I think that not actively used daily is an important one on that. And the other ones talk about more sort of police sort of power there.
So the vehicle sign is actually on page 8.
Okay, so yours is slightly different than mine then.
He's looking at the red line.
Oh, you're
Okay,
looking at the
yes.
red line?
There should be then
I'm
two
sorry, I'm looking at the
separate
original
things.
one,
So
I'm
that's
sorry.
important, so I wasn't sure. There's a
Gotcha.
red lined out version. And I
Gotcha.
think
Never
that's
mind.
the one that we should look at first because
Okay.
it helps put it into context that
Gotcha.
this is the language we're eliminating and that's there. So if that's on the
Gotcha.
same one.
Yeah,
And
it's
Tim
on
did
11.
a good job, the assistant law director, of getting the ordinance ready so that if it was passed, that it would be ready to go. But this is the one that's a lot easier to sort of see all the nuts and bolts of what's going on. So are we up to, so everyone have page 11 then now on the right cross-out section? So if there's no questions on the vehicle signs, it should be something that you should read through and look. But we have gone over this with help of the law department, with help from the building department, really page by page, and dissected it really over hours, actually word by word, to make sure that this was first going to be constitutional and also that it was going to be functional. So the next section is permits, fees, and inspections. Those are really the next page after that. Page 12 and 13 for those. Really, the only main things that we changed on those is just really 3 sets of drawings instead of 4. And then we did try to put a note in there, if you'll see on the bottom of page 12, that the building department shall act on an application for sign permits in which they are authorized to act pursuant to this chapter
Yeah,
within 30 days.
We're missing some pages.
Yeah, so we are only having
We're missing,
odd
like, all
numbers.
the even
there's
pages.
11, there's 9.
We're missing 14, 16, 18,
so
20,
13, 15.
22, 24,
From the red
on the
line.
red line, we're
Yeah, feel free,
missing.
yeah.
We're missing all the
You
even
can-
pages on the,
It's consistent. Too.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
But we do have them here, so but
Okay.
Yeah.
we'll just need to do that one.
Sorry, I did not print out the copies that you have there.
but can we look at these on the one that's on the ordinance?
Yes, why don't we do that, and I'll just do it by section number.
Okay.
Yep.
So permitted and conditional signs, prohibited signs.
And actually, I do have, if we still want to do it the way I did make extra copies.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent job.
Code it was taken care of for me, but you never know, so. Okay, you have one that's correct. There we go.
Just
Sorry.
missing all the even pages, that's all
Sorry
right.
about that. This should be,
Okay.
we readjust and make sure there's a 12 and 13.
There is.
Okay.
Excellent.
Are we up to speed?
Yep.
Good. There we go. Small hiccup there.
It's okay.
So,
It's impressive.
yeah, I just think it's much, much easier to read it with the redlining because the redlining is part of what's involved in this, and it's something that you should be looking at and reviewing while we're doing this. So, all right, back to 12 and 13. Like I said, really, the building department, we just want to put a timetable so that people can expect to get their application back in a certain amount of time and that it's in wording or in writing. Exempt signs is 13 through 17. A lot of what we got rid of in this side. So this one's the important one that you'll see a lot of cross-out language here. A lot of this is content-based. So you'll just see things that are like holiday decorations, government signs, and things like that that are way too specific on political signs. There's even there. So those are the type of things that are just not allowed in sign codes. And then we're on to design and construction. This page 17 through 21. This we added just a little further detail, such as like signs shall be constructed of durable material, natural construction materials if possible, with wood, metal, ceramic, and stone be used for signs, and synthetic materials should only be used if they fit in with the sort of design of the building. And then the important side here that I wouldn't mind some feedback on is the permitted signs. So you'll see there's permitted and prohibited on page 18. This is kind of your bulk and your reference of what signs that you'll see. And this is where the color pictures that we have are included. So we are starting to allow, used to allow monument signs, but we are starting to allow grand projecting signs, which are those larger sort of signs that there's a couple on the old historic pictures and there's some included in there. We do have those as conditional uses. So what we're trying to do is give a little bit more variety that you're seeing in sort of these newer developments where they may have, a theater may have a sign that is fairly substantial in size. But what we want with that sign is make it a conditional use, so they have to at least come in to the BZA and get approval for that kind of variety of a sign. So the other one that I have as a conditional is, it's the marquee sign, which is another one of those the marquee is the one that kind of goes over your traditional theaters, and there's a couple of pictures within that document as well. So what we're doing is allowing a larger variety of signs that we've been seeing in applications that have been coming in for our developments in general, but kind of prohibiting signs that have run into problems with. So bench signs is one that we prohibited. Inflatable signs, we had debates on that. Let's see, cabinet signs mounted on the wall. So that's one that's been back and forth. That would be your more cabinet, old style with the coming, like with this electric right up to it.
And that one was back and forth because we just figured there's a lot of other varieties of sort of electric signs that you can have besides the cabinet sign. Pole signs is one I think we all feel like we could have used maybe a couple years back here, is the pole sign. So just no more pole signs allowed in the city. And then the other ones are just other basic signs. So that, any questions on the prohibited or permitted signs, or any disagreement on potentially ones that you think should be allowed or not allowed, or if you're fairly comfortable with that, we can move on to the next.
Any comments?
Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Bonsall?
yeah, I was just want to say thank you to Mr. Gary and definitely to Greg for your work on this. I mean, really, I think Norwood's behind the times on a lot of the stuff that we're now changing, and I think that's really going to be to the benefit of the Montgomery Quarter and really to the city in general to have some of these better looking signs out and not some of the, especially the pole signs that are currently out there. So a lot of other communities are doing things like this, so I'm really excited that we are now taking that step. So thank you.
Mr. Sanker?
Yeah, but just on two questions. One, on the marquee sign and a rotating sign, which is prohibited, is a rotating sign one that has, flash up and say, grand opening November 4th. Then a flash, come see those other clowns. Is that a rotating sign? Or
No, it's slightly different. So
would
there's
that
two
be a
versions of
marquee sign, or is that?
that. Would be an electronic messaging sign if you're talking about like an electric message. They used to have those, the multi-prism indexing signs are the ones that had the three sort of sides and it would switch. Kind of the old-fashioned version of that, like you'd have an advertisement on one side and then it moves to the other side and some other new advertisement. We do have those as prohibited. I think rotating sign, we mean literally on a pole, practically like a sign rotating. Yep.
Like the old Ford dealer up the street.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So where the
We're
one that different
aging
messages are more related to electronic messaging.
Are there limits in this code?
Mr. Bonsall?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Madam President. Are there limits in this code to like how often that these signs, like the electronic signs, for example, there's some that I've seen down, vacationing down in Florida that they're very flashy, they're very annoying. What kind of limits are you contending for that?
Yeah, there are some, and I think I really have just the three, and I think we'll touch on that when we get there. That way we're all on the same thing, and there are definitely limits on the lumens on that as well, or candle lumens.
Any other comments before we move on? Okay, go on.
Okay, thank you. Sign placement, we won't go into a lot of detail on that. There's not anything, it's just more logistics and what makes sense, so they're not in the way of everything. Let's see, yep. A lot of the different ones that you see there are, if some are crossed out, we're really, like temporary signs and all that are more organized later on in the code here. Sign area, that's, I think, as a start here of like kind of a bulk of you're really starting to get into the code here. And if you look at page 22, kind of at the bottom of that starts to talk about in the R district, a total permitted sign area per building is 1/4 square foot per linear foot of building frontage. Then it goes on for the neighborhood business district and O districts, that it's 1/2 square foot for each linear foot of building frontage. And then same with the GBD, CBD is a 1 square foot for each linear foot. And then the premises fronting on more than one public right-of-way, we still are allowing that frontage. But the next I here, make sure that they don't use the frontage to double up on one side, is what that provision means. So any questions on the 1 square foot per building frontage?
So if you had one that fronted on more than one side, you could potentially have signs on both sides, but you could
Yeah.
not put one large sign that would account for both of the sides.
Correct, ma'am.
Good,
Yep.
thank you.
And then the next one here is where you get into the illumination signs. And just the provisions on that. Let's see if there's steady, stationary, down directed, and shielded. Oh, illumination, this is just actually a little bit more on your actual illumination of that. It goes into some signage, square footage for neon illuminating signs, not to exceed 12 square feet in area. Going to be included. And then I think it'll be up here in a little bit here that your electronic messaging and how many candle. I know we have a candle. Yeah, it's on page 29, but we'll get to that then. So illumination just gives your externally lit signs are permitted, but only illuminated with a steady, stationary, down direct, and shielded light sources. So just provisions based on how you light. And really then it starts to get into the design standards per sign type. So it starts on page 23, and then it'll just go through each of the design standards for each of the signs. So you'll have design standards for monument signs. Those we actually allowed to be slightly larger, just because typically those are done fairly well, and since we're taking away pole-mounted signs, we wanted to give folks a little bit more flexibility on that. And then it goes on to temporary signs. One big provision on that is not to exceed 60 days per calendar year. So that kind of gets more into your political sort of message signs, where you're not allowed to say political sign. Those are considered temporary signs, so you're allowed to limit the time duration based on it being a temporary sign, not necessarily a political sign or a political message. So whether that's enforced or not, that would mean really that at least we have the authority to take down a sign if it's inside someone's yard for over 60 days, even if that is a political one, even though that gets a little testy. Grand projecting signs, we start to get into some of the provisions on that. Now we do allow a grand projecting sign to be no taller than 30 feet from the bottom most part of the sign to the tallest part of the sign, and project no more than 6 feet from the facade. So we do, that's a pretty bold sign, but I think we're being a conditional use, we're looking for it to be part of a bold project. It wouldn't obviously apply to a one-story sort of building with a 30-foot sign on it. So that's where the conditional use comes into play there. But I mean, we're allowing a little bit more interest there. And same with the marquee sign. That marquee sign, which is on the next page, can be pretty sizable too, if it has certain standards associated with it. But that's why it's a conditional sign. So it's a little bit of a roll of the dice, I know, on the grand marquee and projecting signs, or the grand projecting signs and marquee signs, but with that conditional use, we feel like we have covered our bases a little bit there. And then it goes into wall signs, and those are more standard signs. It just says that wall signs cannot be painted on buildings or on windows. Canvas blade signs, awning signs. And so it just, I won't go and read all of them, but and then portable signs are in there. And then on page 29 is when where you have your electronic messaging centers. And that goes into Mr. Bonzel's question there. The provision 5 under electronic messaging on page 29, the nighttime brightness level for electronic messaging center signs shall not exceed 0.03 foot candles above ambient light conditions. Now, I don't know exactly how to quantify foot candles, but I know that that is a reasonable measure. And a lot of what we did was look at the standards that sign companies have, so that it fit within theirs. We weren't trying to pick some arbitrary number on there. We were going with what the standards were for typical signs. I don't know if that answers Mr. Bonzel's question enough. Off-site signs, pretty much what comes down to billboards, is something that you, as a municipality, have to allow. That was another court decision that goes into, I think the basis is that if you don't allow them, it's discriminatory against potentially commercial uses because it's obvious that it's going to be related to a commercial use. So I don't know the exact sort of provision with that, but I think that's where its underlining legal argument is. What we've tried to do is that we can do it by distance. So instead of, it used to be 300 feet facing the same flow of traffic, and we moved it back to 500 feet. So with our dense streets right in here, it seems like it's going to be pretty tough to find a good location 500 feet from moving traffic in order to locate those. And then on highway traffic, we have it even further back. We have it like 660 feet from the edge of the freeway, and shall be no more than 20 feet above grade, which seems high in itself, but it used to be 40.
Yeah.
So 20 feet is restrictive in its own right. By, if you picture 20 feet off the highway, that starts to limit what you can do. And then multi-message and variable message devices, it talks about that as well. And I think that is pretty much the bulk of the major changes. There's a lot of cross-out language because it gets specifically into shopping centers, industrial districts, and things like that. That starts to infringe on the content base because you're discriminatory almost under a certain district. So you don't want to make any specific provisions under that. You can do specific types, but not provisions under commercial. And then just the legal non-conforming signs when that is able to be transferred over. So some places are aggressive and they say within 5 years you have to change your signs, and if they're legal non-conforming. We didn't dive into that issue, obviously. So we have it very similar to how our zoning code is, that if a sign is abandoned or destroyed, or the repair is equal to exceed 70% of the value, then the sign needs to be replaced, and using this code. And what's nice is that Chris Brown, the former assistant law director, he had talked about this. He's on the planning commission. That this is one of those that you will see kind of immediate, because signs get so replaced so frequently that we will start to sort of see the benefit of changing this sign code sooner than we would for maybe our development side planning and zoning code, which projects take a little longer and there's a lot more time involved with those projects. With that, we're open for questions.
Mr. Blair?
What about the people that spin signs and stuff? Is there anything on that?
I think we call that moving signs, and I think we do have something on it that, and I can't remember whether there's, I forget on that, whether there's a provision, because we had discussed that. I don't know if you remember, Mr. Moore, about there's some provision that makes that more difficult than you would anticipate. I don't know whether it's under a First Amendment type of thing, and I had it under, I think if we go back to page 18. So if we go under page 18, I think we did have it, we have moving signs on there, so it's just whether you call that a moving sign, and then I think under definitions we did define moving signs, and I'm not sure that if we, but that is something I can look into, but for some reason it's in my memory that there's some provision that makes that more difficult than you think. So where we do have moving sign, which I would consider that a moving sign, and we don't necessarily have a definition of moving sign. So that might be something to look into.
Because it is under the prohibited signs?
Yeah, moving signs are under prohibited signs. So at that point, I mean, I would call that we would count that in under moving signs. Now what I can do is further investigate to see that if we enforce that portion of moving signs, whether we would find ourselves subject to a lawsuit. So that might be something to figure out, but we can, in the meantime, keep it in as a provision and kind of go from there do a little bit more investigation.
Would you need to put that in under definitions then as well?
I think this would give us flexibility
good with it?
by movement, that
Okay.
it doesn't necessarily need to be under definitions, but I'll leave it to the law director.
Legal minds.
Look, Mr. Blair, if I could direct questions through the chair to Mr. Blair, I'm not quite sure exactly what you're getting at. I mean, I don't think we can ban somebody standing on a sidewalk holding a sign, because they might be picketing.
Right.
So I'm not sure if you give me an example of what you're talking about.
Like for advertising, like how some car dealerships have those people standing out there.
Standing out,
Spinning their
okay.
signs.
Yeah. Okay, I thought that might be, well, I don't remember. We did talk
Yeah,
about
we
that
did.
kind of thing. That and the dancers and that kind of thing. And I'm not sure where it came out under the text here. And there's a lot of limits on what we can and can't do, but, yeah, well, that's one of the questions that I'll take a look at and have some idea, hopefully better by next week, or next meeting.
Yeah. Remember some type of stumbling block on it.
I was in Colorado where my son lives, and the dancing Statue of Liberty was in Colorado, so my gut instinct is you probably can't,
Yes.
you probably can't prohibit that, but. Any other comments? Mr. Bonso?
Thank you, Madam President. And so I guess my question to Mr. Orris is that, can we prohibit digital signs on billboards? Like, if you drive down 71 towards downtown, there's a few of the billboards now that have the rotating digital signs. I mean, is that even something, I see that there's a provision in it, like, specifically allowing it. And I didn't know if you had to put that in there just because it would be, I didn't know why that was added in there. And is that something that's currently allowed today?
I think the thoughts were on that if you're going to have a billboard, the fact that it's a changeable message on that billboard isn't any more detrimental really than a regular billboard. And I don't know whether there's a legal thing that is on there. I think we tried to limit at least make it safe. So at least 8 seconds, which will remain, I think on page 30. There's a bunch of provisions that talk about the multiple message sign.
And then a follow-up question, Madam
Yes,
President.
Mr. Bonso?
Yeah, thank you very much. So if somebody wanted to change their existing sign, on Montgomery Road, right past UDF, there's a billboard right next to the Midwest Woodworking, I guess that building there. Can somebody currently today, take that sign down using the existing, structure of the sign and put up this digital sign that can change in that residential district?
That's a tough question because whether the structure of the sign, typically now you can move in, a sign and then put it back. I guess if it was different, if there was more than 70% change in construction material, that would be, tough to sort of view how that was. So it seems like it's possible within the framework that you currently have. Now, if the whole sign were to be unused for, I think it's 6 months is typically how we have it, or totally destroyed, then they would have to move it back on there. But whether the grandfather clause saves it from sort of the multiple message sign, that is a matter of how much construction goes on.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I would be just personally concerned about that because there are billboards that are in residential areas. I guess that one's in a general business district, but on Sherman Avenue, there's one near the Wood Bar, and just to me, I just want to make sure that we don't have these electronic signs going up in neighborhoods. And so if we do allow that, I just would want to make sure that it has to conform to all of the other provisions of this code as well. And so I don't know, maybe we can get an opinion from the law department if that's possible to see how that reads.
Yeah, we just have limitations on how close it can be to another sign, but nothing related to that, at least.
Great, thank you.
But yeah, we can look into that.
Any other comments? Questions? How long have you been working on this, Greg?
It's been a while, maybe
I was the chairman of community development.
Yes, he was the chair.
Went through this the first time.
Are you serious?
Yes,
Wow.
perseverance.
Any other questions before we let Mr. Orris go? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
So we'll move on to consideration of an ordinance adopting updated sign regulation code under Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances. Mr. Bonsall,
Yep, I move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Motion on the floor is to have the first reading. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have the first reading.
Ordinance adopting updated sign regulation code under Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances.
We will move on to introductory readings of resolutions, and that is the one we added, a resolution objecting to the renewal of the liquor permit of Pal Cincy LLC, DBA Sherman Market, permit number 66200-54001, requesting a hearing and declaring an emergency. It's your pleasure. Mr. Bonsall,
Yep, I move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
seconded
of the
by
resolution.
Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So for this, we only have a limited time to get this, I guess, objection into the, I guess, liquor cabinet, liquor control board. And Mr. Gary has been working tirelessly on trying to ensure that this resolution, you know, has everything that we need, all the ammunition that we need in order to make sure that we can object to this permit, or their liquor license, and to hopefully ensure that the liquor control board agrees with that and does not grant that. So just want to thank Mr. Gary on that one. And it's very, very, very well written, a lot of legal language here, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing the results of this. Thank you.
Mr. Blair?
I know that Sergeant Lewis, along with Chief Kramer and all those involved with getting that shut down, for all their hard work and effort that they put in. And I know, because I live about 4 houses down from that Sherman Market, that with it being gone, it's been such a pleasure. And there's not been nearly as many problems as there was. And so I think this is very important, and I want to thank Mr. Gary as well.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Resolution objecting to the renewal of the liquor permit of Pal Cincy LLC DBA Sherman Market, permit number 66200540001, requesting a hearing and declaring an emergency. Resolution objecting to the renewal of the liquor permit of Pal Cincy LLC DBA Sherman Market, permit number 66200540001, requesting a hearing and declaring an emergency. Resolution objecting to the renewal of the liquor permit of Pal Cincy LLC, DBA Sherman Market, permit number 66200540001, requesting a hearing and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Mumper?
Move the resolution be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have no administrative reports and no other requests to address council, so we'll move on to unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Mrs. Hanahan?
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to clarify an issue that came up last week with the Norwood City Schools in the programs that are set for May 27th, sponsored by Elevations and Pastor Sonny James. I spoke with Rob Armodio this week, who is the superintendent of our schools, and there's been some misunderstandings concerning this program. It was stated at the last council meeting by Pastor James that he and/or Elevations is in partnership with the school for this program. And this is a concern of Mr. Armodio's. I'd like to make sure that it's clarified that there is absolutely no partnership concerning this program with our school system. Elevations and/or Pastor Sonny James is simply renting out the space in the school. Norwood has its own after-school program called Avenues for Success, and they're required to follow guidelines set forth for a school program such as vetting staff, supervision, accreditation, and that the state was working with children. There is absolutely no connection with Norwood City School System in this program. It is a private program that is completely independent of our school. It has not been approved, supported, or recommended by the Norwood School administration. And he, speaking with him, and there was a call with a parent who didn't understand this. They thought it was a school program. So I wanted to make sure that was clarified, that there is no connection there.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanahan. Any other unfinished business? Mrs. Hanahan?
I'll do this 3 times. Thank you, Madam President. This is going to be difficult to explain. After our previous action with TWG development, we had put out a resolution saying that we were not in favor of the TWG development, and it was sent to the state. As I was going through some of the records and some of the requirements for TWG to even apply with the state, they had to apply and they had to have a letter from the local municipality stating that the current zoning will permit the proposed development. I do not believe, and as we discussed at the last meeting, it doesn't meet the proposed development. The zoning doesn't. I have talked with the state about this. What has happened, though, is there was a letter sent by Jerry Stoker which says the current zoning will permit the proposed development. And I don't think it does. We think it does because of the parking issues. Also, he drafted a letter which said that the city had identified a need for affordable senior housing. Where is that data? How was this done? I have never seen anything with that. And the mayor had originally was in favor of this project until we did the research. And I would like a letter sent to the mayor asking that he write a letter to the state in his opposition now, because TWG has still gone ahead and applied for these tax credits. And when they do that, they're doing that under the recommendations of our city and Mr. Stoker stating that it does meet our current zoning. I would also like to see Mr. Stoker correct his letter also and inform the state that it's not the correct zoning. So if a letter could be sent to the mayor asking that.
Did you want one to Mr. Stoker as well, or just the
Well,
mayor?
have the mayor ask Mr. Stoker, I think would be the better way to do it.
So what you're asking is that the mayor write a letter rescinding his previous
Yes.
letter
Thank
of
you.
support?
And having Mr.
I'm
Stoker.
going to do that in a
write the
motion to
letter.
make sure that we cover this, okay?
Yeah,
You want to move that you do this just to cover it?
okay.
Okay, is there a second to that? Second by Mr. Blair. So the motion on the floor is to write a letter and ask the mayor to write a letter to the city withdrawing their support and indication that it meets zoning laws. And I think that's applicable with the resolution that was passed. Any discussion? Mr. Bonso?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So I'm not like a zoning expert here. Are we sure that I don't want to write a letter to the mayor saying that it doesn't meet zoning when maybe it does. Are we sure that it doesn't meet the zoning with the way the park? 'Cause I know the parking's on the opposite lot. Is there, maybe because the law director, has he by chance looked at this, or?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. My understanding is that the use is permitted, a residential use is permitted on Montgomery Road. But the specific design of having the parking on two different lots across the street from each other is not permitted without a variance.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
Like I know what I'm talking about.
Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to draft a letter to the mayor asking him to withdraw his support and the indication that it meets all zoning requirements. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion carries. Any other unfinished business? Mrs. Hanahan.
I'm so sorry. I was hoping somebody
Don't be
was
sorry.
in between me there somewhere. Okay, I'd like to go back to the C9 Trust and the Millennium. And I have questions as to if Mr. Stiff has the authority to call and talk to Mr. Gatto and say he would like to sit down and come up with a plan to buy him out. I don't know if he has the authority to be negotiating with this contract, or with any, this is a contract. I've been working on this for quite a while, this program, and I was told when I got into it, it was complicated, and it is very complicated, but then at the same time, the premise is simple also. You have your insurance, and then you have, your payback. And as I said before, I think there is a whole lot more owed. And when Mr. Stiff does something like this, I have talked with Mr. Stiff. There are very few people in this city that understand the plan. Tammy Stickley and I went to AEBS. We got a really good overview of what the differences were and what the Millennium was, which is now the United Health, or the Retirees Plan, and the C9 Trust. I have heard this called by people the Band-Aid and aspirin plan. It's insulting and it's offensive. And I am finding that people who are against this plan, or who are speaking negatively against it and wanting to close it or stop it or buy it out, they have no idea what this plan really is, why these people have the plan, what they have negotiated. It's a contract. We have seniors who are on very meager pensions. And we're talking $20,000 a year. And they're being begrudged $2,000 toward their premiums. This is a matter of food or prescriptions for these people. And I think before anybody starts making decisions and talking about this, they ought to know what this plan, why these people have this plan, why it was offered to them, what it is, what they've already given up, which has been tremendous. And I just hope that, people know what the plan is before they start making decisions and trying to negotiate, where I don't even think he has the right to be doing this, trying to negotiate with one of our contracts. So that's all I want to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanahan. Any other unfinished business? At the last meeting, I talked about the safety day, and I didn't have the right phone number, and so people who are calling 803-RIDE, I was asked to make sure that I give the right phone number this meeting. So if anyone is interested in having safety equipment installed in your home, if you have children who are under the age of 5, you can call 517-HOME, HOME, and they'll set you up with our safety day that is going to take place on May 13th. So I wanted to clarify that phone number. So it's 517-HOME. There are also some flyers back there for that you can feel free to give to your neighbors, and there's also a flyer for the having installed and also to volunteer for that day. Is there any other unfinished business? Any new business? Mr. Clark.
I just wanted to tell everyone about the Norwood High School Silhouettes are doing a dinner theater. It's like a go and have refreshments, desserts at 6 p.m. on May 6th, Saturday, May 6th. So you'll enjoy refreshments at 6 and then go over and they have a show at 7 o'clock, and it's a tribute to Broadway, so it should be a lot of fun, and they'd like for us to invite them. They just won grand champion at the last competition they were. We've Norwood has not won that award since the 80s under Mrs. White.
Mrs. White.
So that's a pretty big deal. So I just wanted to invite
Is this
everyone
at
to
the high school or middle school?
You'll start at the high school cafeteria, and then you'll move over to the middle school auditorium.
May 6th at 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Reservations, I'm assuming?
Yeah, well, you can purchase tickets at the door, or you can contact their director, which is Adam Robinson. You can email him robinson.a@norwoodschools.org. Yeah. And he'll get you set up.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. And so I just wanted to bring our attention to an event going on this weekend in West Norwood called the High Five Parade. And I brought this to our attention last year, and it was a great event. But basically, it's a parade that they're trying to get youth and kids involved, and they're trying to spread joy and cheer like a big high five in West Norwood. And they'll actually go on this parade on this 1.5-mile route that starts at Carter and Mills Avenues, and it goes all the way, it'll kind of wrap around West Norwood and go to Victory Park is where it's going to end up. And so they had a police escort last year. Lieutenant Murphy was there and made sure everything was safe, and it was just a really good time for the children. It was a really good time for the neighbors. I mean, people were coming out on their porch and just smiling and waving at all the children. So everybody's invited. It's at noon on Saturday. This Saturday at noon. So invite everybody there. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Clark?
I spoke with Laura Ferguson, who does Avenues for Success, and they have a bunch of stuff coming up she wanted me to mention. Saturday, May 13th, they have their Glow for the Cure. That's where they bring out all those big hot air balloons onto the Norwood High School practice field. That's May 13th at 4 p.m. They're going to have bounce houses, food, games, all that good stuff. And then the real cool thing is at nighttime is when they light up all the balloons. But you can actually ride above the field in the balloon, and they take you up and bring you back down. And also they're doing, for the first time this year, they're doing a summer program. It's going to be at Waterworks. They're going to be doing swim lessons, and they're partnering with like the Newport Aquarium, Drama Connects, and some other groups to do like daily workshops and things. So it's open to the first 50 students that sign up. So just contact Laura Ferguson at Norwood Schools, and she'll get you signed up. But it should be a great program.
Is there age limit or?
Yeah, it's grades 1 through 6.
Guess they don't take old people, huh? Sounds like fun. Mr. Bumper, you resemble that remark. Any other new business? I wanted to clarify, apparently last night on Channel 12, they announced that there was going to be a primary election in Norwood, and so everybody's been calling me about, I didn't know we were supposed to vote. And so I called the Board of Elections today and confirmed what I'm about to tell you. So there were 2 Republicans who had filed petitions with the Board of Elections to run in that ward, and so that generated a Republican primary, but only in Ward 4. It is not the rest of the city. And then that person, one of the people resigned from running, and so unfortunately it was too late to call off the primary, so they're still going to be at all of the polls in Ward 4 on May the 2nd, but one person resigned, so they will discard any of their votes, so nobody else has to worry about going out voting. I've had 3 or 4 calls in the last day or 2, so just wanted to clarify that, and I did call the Board of Elections and confirm that today, so just to let you know. No need to worry. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Is there a cost to the city to have a primary? Is it? I'm not sure how this works.
I'm sure there is.
There is.
I know yes, I'm sure that there is. I'm not sure what that is, what that amount is, since it's only 1 ward. I don't know, but I'm sure that there's a cost.
Yeah, I'd be interested just to hear. I mean, just in general, but I'll follow up with the law department or the auditor's office later. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll get a bill.
I think the last was like 13,000 for citywide.
That's for citywide, yeah, so I'm not
If
sure.
there's nobody else other than Norwood on the ballot, then yeah.
Yeah.
Because if it's like a presidential election, we've got something on, then everybody that's got something on has to pay
Pays their share.
of the cost of having that polling place open.
Great, thank
I
you.
really wanted to confirm that it was just going to be that ward, and it is just that ward. So I don't know, how many polling places? 2?
Yeah, so not much.
so I'm sure we'll get a bill. But I just wanted to clarify that. Any other new business? Okay, we'll move on to communications. The first is a proclamation from Mayor Williams regarding Building Safety Month. Deep breath.
I know. Whereas the city of Norwood, Ohio is committed to recognizing that our growth and strength depends on the safety and economic values of homes, buildings, and infrastructure that serve our citizens both in everyday life and in times of natural disaster. And whereas our confidence in the structural integrity of these buildings that make up our community is achieved through the devotion of vigilant guardians, building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure the safe construction of buildings. And whereas these guardians are dedicated members of the International Code Council, a U.S.-based organization that brings together local, state, and federal officials that are experts in the built environment to create and implement the highest quality codes to protect us in the buildings where we live, learn, work, worship, play. And whereas our nation benefits economically and technologically from using the international codes that are developed by a national voluntary consensus codes and standards developing organization, our government is able to avoid the high cost of complexity of developing and maintaining these codes, which are the most widely adopted building safety and fire prevention codes in the nation. These modern building codes include safeguards to protect the public from natural disasters such as hurricanes, snowstorms, tornadoes, wild land fires, floods, and earthquake. And whereas Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public of the critical role of our community's largely unknown guardians of public safety, our local code officials, who assure us of safe, efficient, and livable buildings that are essential to keep America great. And whereas the code official partners in community safety and economic growth, the theme for Building Safety Month 2017 encourages all Americans to raise awareness of the importance of building safe and construction, fire prevention, disaster mitigation, and new technologies in the construction industry. Building Safety Month 2017 encourages appropriate steps everyone can take to ensure that the places we live, learn, work, worship, and play are safe, recognizes that countless lives have been saved due to the implementation of safety codes by local and state agencies. And whereas each year, in observance of Building Safety Month, Americans are asked to consider the commitment to improve building safety and economic investment at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential service provided to all of us by local and state building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies in protecting lives and property. And now, therefore, I, Thomas F. Williams, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Norwood, state of Ohio, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2017 as Building Safety Month in the city of Norwood, Ohio. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Norwood, Ohio, to be affixed this 21st day of April in the year of our Lord 2017. Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Would somebody like to receive and file the, Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, I would recommend that the letter be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Mumper. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that our mayor has, so forcefully, supported our code officials. I mean, they do great work. I'm glad that he's joining many other cities that I can find online that have similar stuff. So I guess it's good that Norwood's also recognizing Building Safety Month. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other comments? Motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hainerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from Chuck Barlow regarding monthly earnings tax report for March 2017.
To Norwood City Council, attached is a monthly report for March 2017
indicating collections in the amount of $1,328,119.68. This reflects an average year-to-date increase of 19.16% over 2016. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, Chuck Barlow, Tax Commissioner.
Mr. Mumper.
Move the letter be received and filed, and I'd like to tell Mr. Barlow to keep up the good work and don't go below that percentage.
Seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So just wanted to point out that March's increase was only 8%. January had a 58% increase, February a 16% decrease, and then March an 8% increase. So that 19% I expect to keep going lower and lower as the year goes on, as we average out that huge increase in January.
We still have April.
It's a negative.
Just being realistic, Mr. Mumper.
More positive.
Just the facts, just the
It would be
facts.
great if we could keep that up, but I doubt it.
It would be.
The motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding Trex license for LB Hyde Park, 3825 Edwards Road. Mr. Moore, can you help us with this? If there are any questions?
Well, my first question would be whether there have been anything sent out from the clerk's office to the various departments for feedback on the
Doesn't
owners,
appear
potential
to.
owners. The way I understand it, I have not researched this. My guess, we did sign the Trex permit for LB. They changed their marketing. The original stuff we saw all said LB Hyde Park. They're changing their website. They're changing their marketing pieces, or they're finalizing their marketing to say LB Rookwood, which is a vast improvement, overcomes our objections and the mayor's objections to them. So we sent them the approval for the Trex transfer. My assumption, I just saw this, well, just in the last couple of days, was that this would be, that this is the actual transfer of the license that's allowed by the Trex. So if we have an objection to this transfer, then we have until whatever the deadline in the letter is to file an objection. But I'm unaware of any
Time's up.
objection. Is that my 5 minutes? Can I get a motion to more time?
I have no idea.
That was really clever little thing.
Do you know if anything's been sent out to the different departments?
I believe stuff was via email, but I will double check.
Okay, so this was just mailed on April the 13th, so, and we don't have to have objections, or responses have to be postmarked by May the 15th, so we do have till next meeting. Mrs. Hanrahan?
I don't know if this could affect this, it might. I know that there is a liquor license now available in Norwood, and I think we need to do what we can to keep a handle on the amount of liquor license that come in. I remember the day when there was a bar on every corner in Norwood. And from what I understand, truck licenses come from another community. So, but I do know that we do have one available, and I don't know if that affects this one or not.
Mr. Moore, can you comment on, like, we pass the resolution on this, or we haven't done anything with this yet?
No.
Council did
Something
not-
to do with
yeah,
them.
Council did not do anything. That the application to allow a Trex transfer came before
There
council.
you go.
Well, it came to council where we asked for any objections. We had an objection to the marketing, to the identification of the business, and once that was resolved, then there was no objection, and so we signed the transfer, the transfer approval, and this is the actual
just
transfer.
the
I
approval.
understand what Mrs. Hannertan is saying. I don't know if that makes a difference to the liquor board or not.
Yeah, I don't know. Mr. Bonsall?
So, thank you, Madam President. Just a question through the chair to the law director. So, are you saying that there was a form that for Trex transfers, there's a form that the city filled out or the city signed that's already been done because we had maybe an approval at a previous meeting, but
Mr.
there's a form. Well, sorry, let me finish. Thank you. There's a form that's already been signed, and for Trex, is it that they need that in order to go through. Like if the city doesn't sign it, they can't Trex a license in.
Mr. Moore?
That's correct. For the Trex, they need our approval.
Okay.
Mr. Mumper?
I'd like to correct Mrs. Hanrahan, there wasn't a bar on every corner. There was either a bar or a loan company on every corner.
The good old days. So what is your pleasure with this? Shall we send it out to the other departments? You have until May the 15th to register objections. Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, I would just make sure that we have sent out to all the funds that are required to be notified, see if there's any response from any of them first before we would have any objection.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Clark. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes,
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We do have one absent member, Mr.
I
Mumper.
move we excuse the absent member.
Seconded by Mr. Blair. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
All
Mr.
members,
Mumper?
Yes,
all members present voting aye, the motion carries. Mr. Mumper.
I move we adjourn.
Seconded by Mr. Blair. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Mumper?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.